Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you. I have a fantastic guest with me. She has great experiences and she's very vocal about her opinions. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with her. And without further ado, Stefanie, welcome to the show. It's good to see you. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, yes, thank you, Olga, for having me on here. So I am Stefanie Frank. I am Vice President and Associate General Counsel at Thriveworks. We're a mental health company where we have over 300, almost 400 locations across the country where we provide mental health services, one of the largest ones in the country. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here.
Really cool. So before being an in-house lawyer at this fantastic organization that does very important work, how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. My path, my journey has not always been a straight line. This being lawyer is my third career, but we'll focus just on that. Prior to Thriveworks, I worked at the Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, which is the professional association for MFTs. And I was there for about 3.5 years. I'm at Thriveworks now for 3 years as of the recording of this, as of today. I'm here 3 years, and I was at AMFT for 3.5 years. Also a generalist there, as I am here at Thriveworks. And I kind of fell into the mental health legal world. It's a very small world, but I love it. And prior to that, after graduating law school, I worked at a company called Stateside, where we did legal, regulatory and legislative monitoring. So I worked on the regulations team where we assisted our clients in new rules that came about that would affect their business.
I love that. I love that it is, in fact, your third career. You have had many adventures. And I love that you talk about sort of this being generalist versus specialist. I'm just curious, I guess. I do want to talk to you a little bit in depth about it. How would you define it? You know, what does generalist versus specialist mean to you? And I guess, how do you become one or another?
Sure. I have only ever been an in-house generalist. I was an older law student, so I knew I didn't want to go into a law firm. And how I view a generalist is basically any legal issue, concern that a company has will come across my desk, whether it's labor and employment, whether it's corporate governance, rules and laws governing the practice of the mental health practitioners, every trademarks we're currently working on, so anything and everything that can affect a corporation on the legal side is something that I have at least touched. And as opposed to what I view a specialist as is that they just do labor and employment, or they just do M&A, or they just do contracts. Whereas I've been involved in all those things. I also feel like a lot of people think that being a generalist, you need to know a little bit about a lot of things. I think you need to know a lot about a lot of things. I think the knowledge, there are a few things where you're okay with surface information, but there's so many things that you're going to have to know deeply because your company is relying on you to mitigate any risk that could happen. So, certain issues just as deep as a specialist might. but over numerous areas.
Yeah, I think that's about a correct assessment. I think, and to your point, if it is core to your business, chances are you'll know it better than your outside counsel, because you live that issue every day. I think, and the art here is to actually know what you need to know in depth and what you can kind of know superficial. I guess maybe how do you make that decision? Which areas you know in depth? I guess one mark is what's important to your business. Are there any other telltale signs where to focus your deep dives?
I think in addition to, how it helps the business, I think being able to recognize where there might be a higher risk. And so that you need to know more, or as you're doing research, you come across something that asks a deeper question. You end up with extra deeper questions that are going to affect the way your company does business, or might cause it some other risk. For example, I have a deep depth knowledge of HIPAA. Obviously, we're mental health providers, we're a covered entity, but then there's all the new privacy laws, CCPA, CCRA, Colorado, Utah, Virginia, and all the other ones. So now it's, yes, we need to be in line with HIPAA, but now I'm having this other question that comes up that I know is going to affect our business, that now we have to, we need to be in compliance for that. So surface knowledge of that is no longer sufficient. We need to know it in more depth.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to think through that. And then I want to talk about it a little, sort of how. So how do you first make a decision to be a generalist? What is this? What are the factors you would consider if you had to do it all over again, in kind of going right to a generalist path or going left to a more specialist path? How would you think about it?
Sure. I think I would stick with my generalist path. I absolutely love it.
I'm not
I
changing
do.
my mind.
I'm not changing my mind. I think you need to be okay with the constant change of topic. From not just from day to day, but from minute to minute, hour to hour, I could be working on something completely different. Even just an example, today I was helping my medical records team. We're going to create some new training. I have an ESG meeting later on today. I had, oh gosh, I can't even remember all my meetings, working on our OKRs for the quarter. So it's, trademarks. Like I said, we're dealing with trademarks, and we're discussing some of those issues in depth. So you have to be comfortable with the constant change of topic, and not just within labor and employment. I know there's many, many different topics that fall under that. I know I have to deal with all of them when it comes to in-house counsel issues, but those labor and employment attorneys might never see due diligence under M&A, whereas a generalist will see both. And I think in making the decision, you have to know yourself, and you have to know what you're comfortable doing and where your passion lies. Because if you do have a passion for contracts, if you have a passion for legal ops, if you have a passion for corporate governance and securities, then it makes sense to take the path where you're just focused on that. I know people who love IP. I love IP. And I thought that's what I was going to be doing, either media law or IP law, something like that. And I fell into mental health law. I love it. But I think it's really about knowing yourself and knowing where your skill set is and where your passion is.
I love that. We have a hello from Mary Rose. Thank you for saying hello. I'm going to encourage folks to ask questions and participate and be part of the conversation, because if
Absolutely.
you are, you're going to get a whole lot more out of it. Otherwise, I have many questions. I can talk all day, so can Stefanie, but we can answer your questions. Let's talk a little bit about sort of how, you make a decision to be a generalist. You sort of mapped out your passions and your skills, and that you're okay with not remembering the last 10 meetings because there's just so many and there's great diversity in them. So you are that person. Now you graduated from law school, or maybe you had your law firm job, or maybe you didn't have your law firm job, maybe you go straight to it, or maybe you had another in-house job where you have been specialist. There are many ways to get to a generalist, and they're all equally valid ways to get there. How do you sort of choose the right job, and how do you show competences to be the person right for the job, meaning you are going to have a meaningful impact on day one? That's my definition of the right person for the job, by the way. Maybe that's the wrong
Yeah.
definition.
No, I like that definition. That definition's great, that you can bring your full self to a job. And I think if you think you might want to be a generalist, I'd say look at smaller companies, smaller legal teams. I know general counsels, big, world of general counsels. They're all generalists. Um, Hence general counsel. But because they're general.
Yeah, like if you're confused, it's right in the title, not
It's
a
right
job
in the
description.
title.
It's in the
Yeah.
title.
um, which obviously are the hardest positions to get. But if you're interested in being a generalist, I'd say look at smaller companies. I was the second attorney at both AAMFT and Thriveworks. I'm the second attorney, so we were a small company. So there's small legal team. There's no choice but to be a generalist. There's no choice but to have to deal with all the issues that come to the business. I think that even if I've had hired attorneys from law firms that were specialized in an area, but were interested in being a generalist. And that's what I looked for when I was hiring my team. I wanted to make sure that they understood being a generalist was as best they could, as best as I could describe it anyway, and then be able to know, like, yes, this is actually what I want to do.
That's a great answer. We have Julie saying hello, and then we have a question from Mary Rose, which I think is a great question. There isn't a sort of an inherent trade-off between, knowledge and breadth, right? There is an inverse correlation in nature between quantity and quality. That's basically what we're dealing with. But at the same time, you have to serve your team, and you have to provide services, and you have to be competently available for them. How do you deal with the sort of expectations of trade-offs between quality and quantity, breadth and depth? How do you have those conversations? I think we started having these conversations around that you actually need to choose where depth, but there is another aspect to it of communicating with your team members who need to be supported, maybe in things that you don't have breadth or depth.
And that's I would agree with that. That's really, we would need, where there's an area we recognize when there's an area we don't know that well. That's why I make sure when I bring on team members, I have team members that, like, I don't know everything. So I make sure to bring on team members that want to be generalists, but also might have a knowledge where I have a knowledge gap. Or that's when we go to outside counsel and seek additional help. Or that's when I get hyper focused and I drill in and I do my research and I'm able to pull what I need to. I talk to other attorneys, get other opinions, speak to outside counsel, like I said before, and really pull all of that together. So if there's a topic that I may not be perfect at, I have no problem being honest with. I think that's key. Being honest with internal stakeholders, saying, I don't have that answer for you. Let me look into it. Let me figure it out. Let me see if outside counsel can help with this. Let me see if one of our other attorneys has a knowledge on this or can start doing research on it. And I think that's really key. You know, we're trained, it's the practice of law. So we're practicing it, we're learning as we go. And that's one the great thing about being a generalist is that it's a constant learning.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely think that this getting back to you is a thing. But before you even, and I'd mentioned that you may not know everything is also, I think, is a key thing. I think there is a sort of a third step in gathering facts and the learning from the person who asks question that is very important, because it's actually impossible
Absolutely.
to answer a question if you don't understand the question. And I do think that we, all of us lawyers, are not go through life not understanding questions that we quickly answer. Because if you listen and ask and really clarify, the question is often very different or more narrow or has an angle to it. And I think that's an important thing. And my experience is that my clients really want to be heard. and,
Yes.
and they do not necessarily need answer yesterday or even immediately. What they need is that they know that you understand that and you'll give them a competent answer on a timeline that makes sense. And for
Mm-hmm.
that, that that that's
Yeah,
that's a different
I agree.
skill.
And sometimes it's not even it may end up not even being a legal issue. Sometimes just sitting down talking to them, be like, okay, I don't understand what you're looking for. Explain the situation to me, explain the problem to me. And sometimes we end up talking things out where it's like, oh, we have a solution that'll work that we don't need to do in-depth research for.
And
It's
it
really
may not be even a legal
right on the
question
head.
in the end. In the end, it may be just
Exactly.
something else.
Just something I've had people internally come to me and say, hey, I just need to talk this through with somebody, and I don't know if there's a legal question, but I just need to talk it through. And I think that that's fine. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, understanding internal stakeholders, understanding their questions, understanding why they're asking what they're asking and what exactly it is that they're looking for, because maybe their question doesn't actually reflect what they're looking for. And having that relationship with internal stakeholders is something that, in my opinion, since I've never been outside counsel, you can only get by being inside counsel, is to really, really knowing because they're your coworkers too. They're not just your clients.
Yeah. And I think you have to recognize that asking a good question on the first try is hard.
It is.
That it is actually really hard. It's you putting too much pressure on your client to ask the right question when they don't know law and they may not know everything about their business. So that's a really, really high bar. We do have, Mary Rose asking really good questions. And this question is around sort of buckets of knowledge. I do think there is an aspect to it, depends on your business, right? So it depends answer. But at the same time, as in house law, some things that are kind of more fundamental working knowledge of
Sure.
running a business, whatever a business
Mhm.
is. So I'm just curious how if you were to think in buckets, which
Sure.
buckets would you think about?
What buckets would it be? Oh my gosh, there's probably so many. And yes, the whole lawyer answer of it depends applies to this. Uh, so if you work, it depends falls into if you work in a highly regulated industry like healthcare, oil and gas, insurance, any of those. So you're going to have the industry specific laws and rules as a bucket. You're going to have labor and employment. If your company does acquisitions, you're going to have an M&A. Contracts is a huge bucket. Um, just general internal business questions that may have legal implications. Um, Data privacy, huge, right? Um, what other buckets? Intellectual property. I'm trying to think if there's any other. I think those are the main. I'm sure I'm forgetting something,
Yeah,
but
I mean,
those are the
I don't
main
think
buckets I would think.
I would add to that, if you're a consumer facing business, you have slightly different angle
Yes.
of, because there's
Mm-hmm.
always a, sort of consumer class actions, and sort of false advertising, that type of
Yeah,
stuff.
litigation. Yes, litigation. There's a bucket for you. A bucket that we pretend doesn't exist, right? No.
Yeah, it exists under some circumstances. So I think it's important, but I think you pretty much nailed, the main ones. There is a little bit of, conversation going on here around the brass and quality and trade-offs. In the long term, we can know equally well everything, but short term, sometimes I think there are trade-offs. But maybe it's just me.
Sometimes there are trade-offs. Sometimes, and I had a question a couple of weeks ago about certain APRN, which is nurse practitioners, prescribers. Certain question about their practice and something that they can or cannot do in a specific state, and I'm looking it up, and their interpretation, the APRN's interpretation of the law, my interpretation of the law were different, and I ended up going to outside counsel to get some additional assistance in it to help with the answer. And sometimes that happens, and he found the answer way in a place I would have never thought of looking. So use your resources. I mean, it's the same even if you're a specialist, I think, as well, is knowing how to use your resources, whether that's outside counsel, whether that's Google. If you don't have LexisNexis, you use Google, and the people in your network and your coworkers.
Yeah, your peers are really great resources, and frankly, most of the statutes and case law is online. Finding it sometimes through Google is challenging,
Yes.
but it is an engine that sometimes finds some things. So, and maybe increasingly with GPT-3, we'll find better things quicker. Let's talk about sort of that's the hope, right? Let's talk about the sort of favorite things of being the generalist, and maybe least favorite. Like, what do you like? What makes you sort of excited to get up in the morning and show up at work and be like, yes, I'm a generalist still today? And what kind of makes you like, this part could be better?
I think the answer is the same for both. I never know what's going to happen in a day. So that is, for me personally, that's exciting. I like that. I like, yes, I could have a plan for the day and it could all just disappear because some major issue happens, some question happens, something happens, or I don't have anything planned for that day. I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Oh, look, I have, 50 emails that I haven't gotten to yet. Great. I can knock those out. Or I'm in meetings all day, or, I never, each day brings something new and different. And that's exciting to me. And then I also have my big projects that I get to work on that I absolutely love doing. And they go from the ESG project to, crafting a code of conduct for the company, to making videos about ethics issues for our clinicians. It's a huge breadth of what I could do. And those are areas where I have in the depth of knowledge, because I do those bigger projects on them. And those are exciting to me. What I don't love about it is sometimes it can get overwhelming. I'll admit, when it all comes, there'll be times when it just comes at you from every direction and you're not really sure which way to turn. But at that point, you just take a breath and you're like, okay, priorities. What's the most important? Who's asking me what? And, going from there.
Yeah, very interesting. Speaking of GPT-3, Mary Rose has another question about GPT-3, and let's maybe think about it. I'm curious to hear your answer. What's the impact on generalists of GPT-3? I don't know if you thought about it.
I haven't thought about it much. I've seen a bit about the chat about GPT, and I'll be honest, the whole thing kind of creeps me out. I'm thinking iRobot. I'm thinking The Matrix. I'm thinking Terminator. Like, this is awful.
I have all kinds of thoughts here.
But how will it affect the generalist role? It could from my understanding, it doesn't have facts it doesn't have facts and knowledge, or it only has facts. I can't remember. I don't know it that well enough to say, but how would it affect? I don't know how much it would have an effect at all. I mean, I think in the end, people will still want to ask a person a question.
Yeah, I
it might be a resource, another resource.
I thought I do think that, look, I mean, it's early days. I do think this technology will have impact on law generally, generalists or specialists. I think that definitely will happen. I recently was playing with my pictures, and the output was interesting. Really, my children really enjoyed seeing the alternative versions of their mother, and they preferred some of those versions better, and some they didn't prefer. So there could be multiple versions of Olga, I suppose. And by the same token, there could be multiple answers to a legal question, I suppose. I mean, I think the short answer is the technology is still not there. It is approaching to being useful. I am sort of optimist there. I think it will lead to maybe asking better questions, giving you maybe research better. I think at the end, what we do is not repeating the law. We're applying law to facts. That's experience, and I would say maybe even hard to recreate the more context you put it in, and say in the context of your business. And then I think if you put it the kind of a technology, kind of what its virtue is basically to complete sentences. I mean, that's what it is. You start a sentence and it says, oh, I know where you're going with it, because on average, this is where people go with it.
I mean, maybe it'll help with legal writing if you teach it how to IRAC. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it will be able to complete the sentences. But if you truly find the legal advice, you're not coming with sometimes with a sort of average complete the sentence. You're coming with a application of law to facts, and the facts are usually novel. So I think we'll address some things, and maybe we will get more in-depth knowledge in some areas and maybe not others. But yeah, it's definitely interesting technology.
It is interesting. And again, I think it would end up being just another resource, just like AI is another resource, just like LexisNexis is. It's just another resource that could help us complete our jobs and do our jobs and maybe communicate more effectively. Because I know I have less of a problem with it, but I know some lawyers have a problem peeling back on the legalese and putting things in layman's terms, which is in-house counsel. Doesn't matter if you're specialist or generalist, that's a big part of your job, is to make sure you're explaining things in a way for people to understand. So it could possibly be helpful with that.
Yeah. I have a few more questions. We are sadly coming to the end, but I do have a couple of questions. Do you manage a team of generalists or specialists? Just curious.
Actually, right now, a little bit of as of right now, they're all generalists. We just hired a specialist. So I don't know if we're going to move into the full specialist world. I don't know if we'll ever have a legal team big enough for that, but there are certain areas that are just too heavy that we need a specialist on, or that myself or my general counsel just don't have the knowledge to do. It's a knowledge gap for us, and we think we need one person specifically working on it. So we did just hire our first specialist.
Okay, well, I'm curious, how do you manage team of generalists versus specialists, or how do you think about their career development differently? Because it's one thing to practice, and be in charge of self. It's another thing to do that plus inspire people to go above and beyond every day and complete the mission.
Yeah, I think making sure that people are working on things that they enjoy. That's part of being a generalist. Is I make sure that everybody gets to work on something that they enjoy. There are some things that nobody enjoys and somebody's got to do it, kind of thing. But for the most part, it's, even though everybody's a generalist, not everybody does everything except for like myself and my general counsel. And I think that, could we eventually move into specialist mode? We could. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. Who knows what the future is going to bring. But I think their career paths are similar, and I think my generalists want to be generalists, and my person I hired to be a specialist wants to be a specialist. And I think that that's key, is that that's their passion. That's what they want to do. That's where they want to learn and grow as people. And I love being the one to help facilitate that, so that they can grow as people and in their profession, and learn different areas of law that they're interested in.
That's a good answer. I love that. I love Jennifer's supplementing our chat GPT conversation. That's a very important conversation, very timely today. And I will encourage folks to share their thoughts on that. Definitely, there is a world where augmentation is a thing. There's all kinds of scenarios that we will be seeing unfolding in front of our eyes. Bring popcorn, as I would say. Whatever it will be entertaining. So be ready for that. I have maybe kind of last couple of questions. Let's talk about kind of inspirations. Sure. What inspires you, to do your work, to show up for your team? What kind of makes you a better professional?
I find inspiration in many places. In when my attorneys, I get feedback that they have from internal stakeholders that they've done a great job. That inspires me. I'm a rock and roll lover. Rock music inspires me. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see that. I am a huge reader. I love to read. I hit like 55 books last year, something like that I read and or listened to. And it's just, I would go back to my rock music is really where I find the most inspiration for me. Newer music, older, is just such a motivator, and just, yeah. I don't know what other words I could put in.
No, you're doing great. And I mean, I think the key here is that lawyers are humans first. And, yes. And they don't always find inspiration from case law or law.
No, they don't know. Or, but, they don't have Black's Law Dictionary back here. That's not where I find my inspiration.
You mean you don't read that for recreation?
I do not read that for recreation.
I mean, I can tell you, when I got to law school and I spent $500 on all my books, I opened them up and I said, where the hell did all the pictures go? Nice books with no
like, what are all these words?
That isn't the whole point, that it has pictures. Anyway, that's a separate conversation. Stefanie, thank you for sharing your passions and sharing your inspiration and predicting the future with ChatGPT, and sharing your generalist journey. I thoroughly enjoyed listening and all your insights and recommendations. If you wanted to leave the listeners, we have quite a few folks here and viewers with something to think about, or if they got nothing else, the one thing you want them to take away, what is it?
Yeah, I think what I'd want to say is that it's okay to be yourself. I know that I am not a typical attorney. When I walk down the street, nobody's going to think, oh, there's an attorney. You can't really see it, but I have green hair. I'm wearing a half skull necklace, and I'm just not, your typical attorney, but I have the same passion as everybody else. So I think that being yourself and bringing your full self and your uniqueness to your job is just as important as doing the work well and accurately and effectively.
Oh, I love that message. Well, thank you so much for joining. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.